listening to Tech Reads, interviews with emerging technology thought leaders. Our sponsor is Softec, the premier technology trade association that has been serving northern Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo County since 1997. Our mission is to create Softec moments where people connect, explore ideas, and create new business opportunities. Learn more at softec.org.
Our guest this month is Veronica Kirin, joining us all the way from Berlin, Germany. She's an author, entrepreneur, business coach, and professional speaker. She's won numerous awards for her work, and she's a two-time TEDx speaker. I discovered Veronica through her book, Stories of Elders, What the Greatest Generation Knows About Technology That You Don't, which is based on interviews she conducted in 2015 with 100 elders, those born before 1945 and often referred to as the greatest generation. Hope you enjoy this opportunity to learn more about Veronica and her insights as an anthropologist and creative coach and leader.
So I am a scaling coach by day, but I'm an anthropologist by night, which is what we're going to be really talking about, focusing on.
You're an anthropreneur, that's right.
I'm an entrepreneur. So we're focused on my first book, but I actually have another study and follow-up to that underway. Right now we're in data analysis. So we can talk about that a little as well, if you'd like.
Sure. And you also shared that you're native Croatian.
I'm a native to the United States. I am a dual citizen with Croatia. My family is Croatian.
Excellent. And how long have you lived in the United States? Or how long?
I was born in the U.S.
Okay. So you just, for the last year and a half, been in Berlin.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting and good that you've got that. So, and a little bit, you probably don't know about myself, but back in 2008, I went out and interviewed 50 entrepreneurs. And I published a book in 2009 called 50 Interviews. So similar to your story, and we'll talk a little bit more about Stories of Elders, but I went out and interviewed. For me, it was to learn about entrepreneurship, as I had not ever worked for myself. And I figured who better to learn from than the people who were out there successfully doing it. So initially, it was sort of just for my own personal information, but the people that I were interviewing kept asking and suggesting, hey, you're asking some great questions. This was back in 2008 when we were in the midst of a great recession, which means they weren't hiring. They're like, I can't give people jobs, but I can certainly give them advice on how to start their own business and give them hopefully inspiration. So it worked for me. And after those 50 interviews, I was finally motivated to take that leap of faith. So I know how transformative the interviewing process can be and how just rewarding it is to hear the insights and perspectives from other people. So tell me a little bit about Stories of Elders and maybe what was the catalyst for you and that project?
Yeah, so I'm a typical entrepreneur where I just have ideas all the time, right? And we don't always take action on our ideas, but this one really was burning for me in a good way. I was owner of a tech company at the time, and I could see how my own behaviors were changing. I could see how the behaviors of my peers were changing. This was about 2015 when I was really starting to consider this. And the iPhone had been out for a while, and we were getting more and more into smartphones and social media. Like we were on the acceleration path, and I just could see the skills were tipping. But also, being that I'm an anthropologist, I don't want to just go by what the news says or what, BuzzFeed articles are saying, because that's probably written by somebody who's a bit younger and it's one perspective. And to me, if I want to understand how something is changing the world, I need to know what it was like before the world changed. And we were just hearing a lot of voices from people who were kind of in the change and living in it. And even myself, I grew up with, rotary phones and going and knocking on doors to see if friends were home, but I had a very small sliver of that, right? I didn't have a full lifetime of that. And that's who I wanted to talk to. So that's over the course of several months and several amazing conversations with friends and confidants, that's how the idea started to take shape.
Understood. And it was sort of to bridge that gap of knowledge that you were lacking and Yeah, it's interesting. And I didn't finish it, but I've listened to a great portion of it. It's on audiobook. So if you don't have time to read like myself, you can listen to it. And it's
Narrated
actually,
by yours truly.
yes,
For
Veronica's reading
better or
it.
worse.
Yes, reading herself. That's quite an accomplishment to do.
Yes.
So we'll come back to the book a little bit, but I did have some questions more relative to kind of how you've evolved, because the reality is you've got a track record now as a successful entrepreneur, helping other people build their businesses. So I have a couple questions related to productivity. So how do you personally get hyper-focused in a noisy world and overcome the challenges of distractibility, which are so prevalent today?
Yeah. I love this question, and it's something that I struggle with just like everybody else. So productivity and focus is the muscle. For some of us, it's an easier muscle to access than others, but the idea of taking away distractions and limiting distractions is something that we have to exercise throughout our days, day by day. So one of the things I'm practicing right now is keeping the phone in a different room for sleep and not touching the phone for an hour when I first wake up in the morning, because it's not just a distraction. There's all of the other things that are on it that are designed to be distractions, because the more they get your attention, the more they make money. So trying to start with fighting the urge and being in that space of, I don't need to see what's going on because nothing is that important. I need to be in my own space and experience what it's like to have a slower morning or evening. I also try really hard to create the boundaries for myself, for space, for focus. So, if I know that I'm not going to be focused at home, then I'm going to go to a coffee shop where there are no distractions, at least not the distractions that I need to act on. Like, there might be music playing on the speaker at the coffee shop, but the laundry doesn't need to be done. It's not my laundry. I don't have to make the meal. I can just buy one. So there's ways to ratchet down distractions. Ultimately, I think for me personally, it's come down to having a real focus on what I want for my future. And because of that desire or that goal, or however we want to label it, is more compelling than the, 5 minutes I might spend on TikTok. So yes, we all need the brain break, and I'm here for brain breaks, but I try to, dangle a carrot that's more enticing for myself than those distractions.
I like that. And I can relate to the working from home. So I've been working in the Story Labs co-working since December. And I can tell you my productivity personally has vastly improved. Plus 2 days a week, my wife works from home, and we realized that that's very difficult for us because we just have things to do and that have been lingering. It's like we finally have an opportunity to get things done that around the house. But for me, I have a mental shift when I come into the office that really improves my productivity and helps me get through that list, that ever growing list, which leads me to the next question. Without a boss, how do you prioritize everything when everything feels important? And then as a follow on too, is how do you stay accountable to that? Because I even found this morning, like trying to get here by 7:30 in the morning for this podcast was not easy, because I'm just so accustomed to having my own schedule and rolling in when I feel like rolling in. And it's
right.
I forgot what it's like to actually have to show up somewhere at a certain time in the morning.
Well, thank you, because that means that I didn't have to stay up really, 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 really late tonight in order to speak with you. But yeah, so I talked to a lot of people about that, like feeling that everything is important, but everything isn't important. It feels pressing because we're used to pings and beeps and all of those notifications on our phones, which make it seem like they're all equally important. But the reality is the tasks on the list are, some are urgent, some are important, some are neither, some are delegatable, some don't need to happen this week. They can happen next week. What's important is that you get it out of your head. If you're holding it all in your head, then it all kind of feels the same, and you're spending a whole lot of energy just holding on to the things so you don't forget them. And that is what makes it feel really urgent. So for me, I've discovered I've got to have things on paper. So I use the bullet journal method. I keep looking at my desk because it's right here. And I'm one of those people that If it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So it's got to be physical. It's got to be on paper. Bullet journal helps me keep it all organized and helps me task my future self. And I'm also one of those people that if there's a task and it hasn't been crossed off or modified in some way, it really starts to irk me. So I play to that. I make sure that I put things in my way for the next day or for the next week or whenever, that I know will be an appropriate amount of energy versus maybe the amount of appointments I have that day or what have you. But I know that if I have it down, like most of the dots for today have been crossed off at this point, or they've been modified in some way. And the reason being, not because I wanted to do them all, but because I felt I couldn't let it go. So all that to say, get it out of your head, use a system like getting things done. You can use a digital system like Asana or Google Keep. You can use a physical system like Bullet Journal, whatever works for you, but get it out of your head so that you can then really see what is urgent versus important. What can you delegate to your future self, or just delegate in general? If you're a business owner and you have a team you can delegate to, delegate it off your plate. And then that will help you stop feeling like everything is happening all at once and it's all very emotional.
Right. Yeah. And it's the need to complete the incomplete. I know that I'm at peace when I have something finished and I've set out to do it. But if everything feels incomplete, of course, you're going to be constantly under pressure. I think too, I've had some experience with having a really good person to delegate something to, and then having that freedom to know it's just going to be handled and I don't need to worry about it anymore, as opposed to taking it all on yourself.
Right. Exactly. Yep. And also check in with yourself if you're overchunked, as Tony Robbins likes to call it. Like, you might be thinking that something feels like really big because it is, and you need to chunk it down into smaller parts.
Yes. Well, and structure, I think we find a structure that works. In fact, that leads me into my next question is, how do you personally practice self-care? Because I've found that, at least over the last 5 years, having some structure around my days and my weeks, which builds in self-care, is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. And self-care is critically important, especially as entrepreneurs, because we can keep working until midnight if we want to. There's nobody to stop us. There's no like legal parameters. There's no, my boss is asleep because you're the boss. Like, you can do whatever you want as long as you want, especially if you have an online business. But if you are an entrepreneur and you're doing something that you feel passionate about, or you're just passionate about something in general, if you don't give yourself those breaks and you don't take care of yourself, you don't get to keep doing it. You're going to burn out, even if you love the thing. So yeah, big on self-care over here. And I agree that having like a daily structure really helps to make sure that you get that time in, because it can sometimes feel like uncool and not fun to self-care, even though it's so important. Since, this is a little bit of a book talk podcast, I'm reading a book right now called 101 Essays to Change the Way You Think. And she has an essay on routines and how sometimes it feels like we're giving up some sort of freedom by having a routine and we're putting ourselves in a box. But in fact, it's much more like how Steve Jobs always wore the same turtleneck day after day, because it takes away decisions that are better spent someplace else. So if you have your morning routine, your brain wakes up in a place of security because you know what's going to happen next. And then you also know you're getting your self-care time in. You know that the important boxes are going to be checked. So then you can be fully present for the things that you're really excited to do for the day. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the routines. And then I'm also a big fan of just like making things extra. Like, why not instead of shower, take a bath with a whole bunch of bath salts and oils in it? Like, why not turn off all the lights at 6 p.m. and light a bunch of candles instead? Like, why not just be like, not Instagrammable because you want to take photos and put them on Instagram, but like, do it for yourself, feed your soul, like, just go extra. You're worth it.
I like that. I like that a lot. I've got a few more questions, but John, you have any? You're here. You have any questions?
No, I'm just
Nothing?
here absorbing.
Okay.
That was fun.
Uh-huh.
No worry. How about you, Connie? Since we're on the topic of productivity, I know you're hot topic. For
Yeah,
you.
it's been really helpful. I've been working on my own since 2008 too. I only had 3 months where I worked at a regular job, and I discovered it took 2.5 hours to commute, get ready for work, make my lunch, take time for lunch at the office. And I thought, if anybody would accuse me of just flitting around from thing to thing and keeping my house clean versus doing my work, my house would be spotless if I spent 2.5 hours a day doing other things. So I'm more productive than I thought. And also I read once that they did studies of how productive people are at jobs or how much time they actually spend working. And it's more like about 5.5 hours in an 8-hour day is productive work.
Yeah.
And the rest of the time you're just kind of not being a machine. So,
Right. And you need those brain breaks. They're just as productive. We just don't quantify them.
right. Sorry,
Well,
I was too quiet there.
And I sense that our interruptions, what bothers me when I'm working from home, when my wife's working from home, is that she comes in and I'm working and she asks me for something, right? It's classic. She doesn't realize the impact that it takes us 15 minutes or longer to get back, especially if I'm working on a serious, like high concentration task. And then I realized that, when I was working in a traditional office, I would get irritated when people would walk up and interrupt me in the middle of my work session, right? I'm working and they have a question, like, just look it up. Like it's easier to ask me. I'm a people pleaser. So people are accustomed to asking for help because you always give it. But then I realized my inbox is really no different. I'm basically inviting interruptions if I'm constantly checking my email. And that is hugely disruptive.
Yes, exactly.
And the sheer the magnitude of email that comes through now, 100 emails a day, there's no doubt that's a pretty typical number of emails I have to contend with each day. I could basically spend all day answering emails that I'm not getting paid for.
Right.
So,
and I think I just heard your phone go off too. So you just got another email while you're complaining about the emails.
Well, that's my calendar. I try to live by my Google Calendar. That has helped.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But I do hear a lot of entrepreneurs and just, people who are really into productivity in general, segment time to look at the email inbox, and that's the time they look at their inbox. And like, what is so urgent? Unless you're really waiting for like a last minute delivery, there's nothing that urgent that you have to live in your inbox for the whole day. 1 hour checking each day, that should be enough.
Well, and if you're managing your projects in your inbox, you're not managing projects well. Like I moved to a project management software 5 years ago, and there's no way I could run my business any other way. I use it. It's called AuthorDoc, and it's just so it silos out the work, the tasks, as opposed to email, which you have to filter through and you have to find. And I don't know how anyone can manage a project through email. It's completely unmanageable way to do it.
I agree. Yeah. You at least have to have some sort of CRM to create a pipeline out of it.
Yeah. And so speaking of technology, I think that the BSOs, bright, shiny objects, is one of the issues. And especially being interested in working for yourself and productivity being important and effectiveness. The BSOs, unfortunately, are also like, there's always a new tool out there to make our job easier. There's no shortage of people offering new solutions. And I jump from solution to solution because I'm looking for what's going to work for me now. Right now, I'm going back to some analog things that are really very effective. They always have been. I don't know why I stopped using it. One I love is called Don't Break the Chain. And if I'm trying to stay on track with something, it's that where you check it off each day. And there's that you're feeling the need to complete the incomplete, but you're doing it for something that you want to do, right? And it's analog. It's a totally untech solution. So how do you evaluate tools, technologies you might recommend to your clients that you've used in your business?
So I first really get clear if there's a shiny object, as you said, or do I really need another solution? Like, am I truly lacking some sort of opportunity that's out there? to automate, to systemize, right? Those are important. But a lot of times the shiny object makes us feel like we need to fix something that's not broken, and that's marketing. So I first get really clear if there's actually a problem, and I use my business. So what I call it is the scientific method of business. So I'm looking for the symptoms within my business and let my business or my clients' businesses tell us if there is a hole, because it will be obvious. It will be repeated. It will be clear. There's something missing, and then we can fix it. From there, I get clear on, okay, what is needed to be fixed? What are the requirements? And so that instead of just swimming in, here are all the options in the world, like here's all the new project management softwares or like all the note taking, like there are so many competitors to Evernote, you can sit and research them all day. So if you know what you actually need in that solution, then you can start to eliminate rather than just swim in it. And at that point, at least you can then narrow the field and truly go clear on both what offerings you need in that tool, what's extra, and then what's the right price point for you as well.
Yeah, it's something you can sustain, because I know a lot of my clients will sign on to some really pricey solutions in anticipation of like, oh yeah, I'm going to need this. And like a year into it, they're like, this is killing me financially to pay for this every month. It's like trying to enable e-commerce on your website when there's solutions out there. I mean, it's an expensive thing to turn on your own e-store, right?
Right.
And if you're not selling products,
tons of solutions for you.
You're going to start to resent that. But you hit on something earlier, I think, which is really important, which is the marketers are trying to show us that we need something we don't. Like, I forgot that productivity solutions fall into that same camp, which is there's something wrong with you and you need to fix it.
Yeah.
No matter what you're doing right. No, you can do better.
We have to remember that business has been around for thousands of years. We were tracking our grain sales on cuneiform tablets. We can do it without all the shiny things. So if we just take a step back and remember that the hot new thing that's going to revolutionize your life might not. And is it worth the time sink as well to transition everything? Like, the problem has to be big enough that you can spend hours transitioning your business to a new system. So yeah,
Well,
I'm a big fan of software solutions and automation, but I want to make sure it's really worth it.
Well, and I've read, I don't know if it's true anymore, but I've heard that Warren Buffett, he doesn't even have a computer on his desk. Like, here's one of the richest men in the world, and he doesn't even talk about no BSOs and using, you know, a system that worked for him. I mean, he must have a computer on his desk, but at some point in his career, he must not have had, but who knows? And I know one of the entrepreneurs I interviewed, Jake Jabs, Connie, you remember from American Furniture Warehouse. I walked in his office, no computer on his desk. His secretary had one. But I asked him, I said, Jake, how do you get so much done? He said, Brian, I only have 2 things on my list every day. I'm like, wow. And it basically was one thing for him. And then the other thing was for someone else to manage basically the rest of the business. So, you know,
when
Jake
you get scaled far enough, it's very fun.
Yeah, it was a multi-million-dollar business that he trusted his people to run. He was basically leading the ship. And it wasn't always like that, but he certainly reached that point in his career where, you know, so he never had any stress, and he was just going around. He was very much a motivated, you know, people loved him. And so he knew his role in the business.
Yep. The CEO visionary.
Yes. Yep. So I'm curious. So you have 2 TED Talks, which is pretty cool. A lot of authors would love to have one. Your second TED Talk was in November of 2020. And here we are almost, or at least it was published in November of 2020. Here we are almost 2 years later from when you made that video. And this was sort of in the beginning phases of COVID. And it's interesting knowing that you're in Berlin too, that you have a little bit of a different perspective than the US. So I'm just curious, how have things changed from what you had that perspective, because you had to get retrospective and give people some thoughts on how to make the most of COVID as compared to where we are today and where we're sort of emerging into this new normal?
Yeah, I think this is actually like perfect timing. I just gave a follow-up speech. Basically, like I would say it's the sister speech to that TED Talk. And I gave that speech to Creative Mornings here in Berlin last month. And so if listeners don't know what Creative Mornings is, it's a free speaker series akin to TED, but it's specifically for creatives and creativepreneurs. It's a fantastic series. It helped me feel confident enough to launch my business way back in the day. So I highly recommend it, and was very excited to speak to them. And they wanted really to land on like, what are we doing now that we're really 2 years out? Things seem to be settling down, but are they? How do we manage it? So my TED Talk was focused on about 6 months of findings that were part of the Stories of COVID research project. So that's the follow-up research to Stories of Elders. It's the next one anthropologically that I'm working on. And I actually really stand by what I was saying in that TED Talk, which is that it's not necessarily the people who have the most resources who are the most resilient in crisis. It's the people who look for the opportunity within crisis. And so then what I went further into in this most recent speech was that we're looking at basically the 5 stages of grief and resiliency. So people who are able to move through the stages of grief faster in the middle of a paradigm shift, big or small, are then able to be more resilient. And that comes with a whole lot of other skills like holding on to outcomes or releasing your preconceived notions about what life or what anything should be like. The people that we see get stuck in grief are usually putting other people's definitions of what their grief should look like on themselves and then forcing themselves to act a certain way or feel a certain way. And so now that I'm at the end of that study, I'm able to kind of zoom out in a way and really see that we just went through another paradigm shift. We go through paradigm shifts all the time. This one was just especially big. It is maybe arguably the biggest paradigm shift that humanity has gone through because this was a global pandemic. So everyone at the same time was going through the same paradigm shift. It looked different country to country, but we were all going through a paradigm shift. Thus, we were all experiencing the 5 stages of grief as a species simultaneously. We can study that. We can see, okay, that was a big paradigm shift. How did I cope? So then now how do I cope in small paradigm shifts? Like, when you get a new apartment, that's still a paradigm shift. Your life is different now. I get a new job. My life is different now. Those are small paradigm shifts. The same coping mechanisms are endemic to each person, big or small paradigm shifts. So that was my call to action in this most recent talk is how are you going to study yourself and how you experienced COVID so that you can build your own resiliency for your next paradigm shift, whether or not it's wanted.
I like that. And being an anthropologist, I can see how that actually has benefited you through what's happened to the humanity. And, you mentioned those life events, and I will say that was the third life event in my adult life that really rocked me to the core. The first was 9/11 because I was very much present to what was going on then. Next was 2008, which was brutal for people. I mean, it launched a lot of businesses, but I'm telling you, that was in my professional life, never had so much frustration and just confusion during that era. And I almost don't remember a lot of the details, but I just remember waking up miserable and having to go through the whole process of because I was in sales, and being in sales in 2008 was a tough gig.
Yeah.
Commission sales is not where you wanted to be. Nobody was buying anything.
No.
And then COVID, and now it's following COVID. It's weird in the US, at least for us personally here, is the gas prices are, and granted, what's happening in the rest of the world is much more significant, but it is again shifting our habits and the way we do things. Like I carpooled today with my wife for the first time in a long time because gas prices never forced us to carpool. But guess what? It's $6 a gallon, which is where we're at Costco, mind you, in California. which is typically where you would see cheaper gas, but not anymore. $6 a gallon, it's forcing people to reevaluate, and it's shaking like, okay, do I need to drive? Can I go into town and make more use of the trip? So there's a positive side I'm starting to see. And like you said, the opportunities that higher gas prices can actually give you is, you're getting on your bike more than you used to. You're thinking twice about, do I really need to go into town today, or can it wait till tomorrow?
Right. Yeah. So there's those little paradigm shifts that we're going to inevitably experience, whether or not they're on the heels of something large. But we can look to ourselves for the answers, because now we have something so big to teach us about our own resiliency habits.
I love that. Well, thank you for telling me about creative mornings. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
And it's great to hear what you're doing with kind of looking closer at how we're emerging from this from an anthropologist point of view. And how has that helped you with, you share a little bit about the fact that you do help people scale businesses, and how you use your anthropology teaching in business, and how we can maybe adopt some of those.
Yeah. Yeah. So put simply, if you talk about cultures, right? So I'm an anthropologist. I study cultures. And we just changed that word.
Insects.
No.
I think of anthropology, I think of insects. I don't know why.
That's not quite right. If you think a little bit more towards Indiana Jones, he studies past cultures.
Okay.
I study present cultures, as you might assume, since I'm interviewing living humans. But so if we change the word culture to markets, then you start to see how anthropology is really nimble as an entrepreneurial area of study. And then in the same way, ethnography. So anthropologists are trained to interview people and be unbiased and really listen to what they're saying in order to then study and understand a group of people. And so if we change the word ethnography to market research, now we get really clear that anthropologists are very, very, very good at understanding groups of people that are not their own group of people. So not my culture. I'm really good at understanding other cultures, other target markets, as if they were my own. And I'm really good at gathering data from them, which means then I have a leg up if I need to roll out a new product or have my clients roll out a new product. So when I'm teaching my clients to either launch a business, open a new channel of income, et cetera, I really want them to go into market research. And I encourage them to do primary research, which means interviewing people. And I teach them how to do that so that they don't have the guesswork. Because to me, I see a lot of small business owners, especially, sit in guessing, and there's a lot of anxiety in that because they assume that maybe the way they think about the world is going to be the way their target market thinks about the world. They're thinking, I'm a millennial, I sell to millennials, so I'm just going to make a whole heap of assumptions about the language I want to use when I'm selling and how I want to describe the product. But as one of my mentors likes to say, when you're in the bottle, you can't read the label. So if you're in the culture, it's a lot harder actually for you to define and sell the product. So I actually demand that my clients do primary research as if they were anthropologists, and I show them how, and then they don't have to guess, how do I label it? How do I describe it on the website? What words do I use? What really is compelling for my potential clients and customers? They know for a fact.
I love that. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I love that quote too about the bottle. So I skipped over one question because it's something I've been working on for many years, but it's around confidence. And what I, am kind of taken back by is your confidence as a young professional, having 2 TEDx talks, taking the authority and the leadership role that you are and leading other businesses, just having that confidence. I think it took me so long to even just be confident to start my own business. Granted, it was way back in 2009, but I think that a lot of the reason why people don't start businesses and don't do the things they do is we lack this inner confidence that you seem to have. And I'm just curious, where did that come from? And how do you keep that in check so that it doesn't flip to becoming arrogant, right? Which people aren't attracted to, but at the same time, keeps fueling you moving forward and achieving more in life?
Yeah, and I actually started my first business in 2010, so we're not too far away from each other in that. Um, but I think that part of it is I just am really good at acting as if. So if I know that if I want to, let's say like open a new channel or launch a new business or whatever, um, I might not know exactly what I'm doing, but I'm going to act like I know what I'm doing because that's the only way we're going to learn. I have to put myself in the deep end in order to learn. There's no other way to do it. And as you did, like you can talk to peers, you can do interviews, you can, I call it building a bench. Like in baseball, you get a bench of people to back you up who have more knowledge than you know, board of advisors or mentors or coaches. But ultimately you have to do it in order to really learn it and to know it. I think somewhere along the way early on, I just got really comfortable going by the beat of my own drum. And what I've learned through doing that is just how to get free of all of the gunk I think that we put on each other in society, the assumptions and expectations that maybe work for some people, but don't work for everybody. And so I'm just out here banging a drum saying, hey, if you feel like you want to go to the beat of your own drum, I'll show you how. And I think that fuels me. And so then perhaps, yeah, it comes across as confidence. There's definitely
risk is a huge part of that. Like, I think why I never took the leap for so many years is I just felt that was such a risky, in some ways, not, it's
financially risky. It's culturally risky. It's societally risky. It's career risky. I think to me, the bigger risk is not trying.
That's the way I used to think about it. Like taking that leap of faith was irresponsible. And, we're raised from a very young age to be responsible adults.
Right. But then like, whose definition of responsibility are you living by? Right. And so to me, I think all I know is I've got like this 1 minute that I'm here. I'm spending time with you. Like, I don't know if there's going to be another minute that comes. I hope so. And so, to me, it's a greater risk to not try.
Yes. And when the fear of the regret, what is it? In one of the gals I interviewed, probably one of the most memorable one was the founder of New Belgium, the president of New Belgium Brewery in Fort Collins, which was this very successful brewery, right? Kim Jordan. And she said they got to the point where the fear of regret was greater than the fear of failure. And her and her co-founder, Jeff, her husband at the time, I remember they just said, like, she was a social worker and she's like, we're going to be more miserable if we didn't take this leap of faith than we would be if we took it and failed. So when that pain of regret exceeds your pain of failure, that to me was a pretty powerful framework and just perspective to look at it. And for me, what launched me, I remember now, it was Landmark. I went through Landmark Education, which is kind of this transformative thing. And that for me was like, just shifted me into something, gave me this confidence and I don't know, maybe a framework that I didn't have previously. So that led me towards a lot of other things down the road.
And I think we also have the opportunity to reframe failure because we always are learning something. So what your vision was when you didn't know everything yet is probably different than what the reality was. Okay, but how much did you learn? How much did you grow? How much more vibrant is your life because you tried? I mean, yes, there's always that scary moment of like, am I double mortgaging the house? So like take calculated risks, but there's so much vibrancy from trying that I think it's really worth it. And so I think that fuels me. And then that also fuels me to like get others doing it as well.
Well, the resiliency, like you said, I mean, but that's the silver lining of COVID is that it's proved to us that we can handle a lot. Like we can take more than we thought we could. And we have survived and we're not dead on the street. We're not all homeless yet. We're all okay in the grand scheme of things. So you start to realize that some of those fears that you had may not be warranted, because here you just went through something so significant. So as a species, I think that we're more resilient than we were before. I think that everything is setting us up for something down the road. Ultimately, our death is the greatest thing we're going to face. But one last thing, because we're a little over on my time that I wanted to take from you today, and I appreciate you giving it to us. You are in Germany, which is much closer to the Ukraine than we are in the United States. And I kind of feel like we are in a bubble and a little bit isolated from what's going on. Initially, when the war started, we were, I think, quite engaged and quite concerned. Mm-hmm. And it's not like things have gotten better, but it certainly is not the leading story anymore here in the US.
Right.
I'm just curious. It's got to be a little more nerve-wracking because you're right there. I mean, you're not far from where the war is actually happening.
Yeah, it's just one country over for us. We got Poland in between. So first of all, I had to really check my own privilege, because I've never been so close to a war in my life, because I grew up in the United States. And so I knew, the anthropology radar goes off. And so I think, okay, I'm not equipped. This is new to me, and I don't know how to react. I can react, and I'll react with anxiety, but is that actually an adequate reaction? And so I looked to my mentor here in Berlin. I asked my friends who have been living here for a long time. I asked a lot of natives, how scary is this actually? And mostly their reactions were, it's horrible. That's not what I was asking. I was asking, how scared should I be being in this proximity to this activity? And a lot of kind of shrugs of shoulders, we were here for the fall of the wall. Then there was the war of Yugoslavia. So there's conflict. And so no, we're not really buckling down for some intensity to spill over, at least not yet. And it seems like we're just kind of in that space now. I'm really impressed and proud of Germany to this day. And I was just at the train station, the central station in Berlin 2 days ago. And still to this day, there are people walking around with crossing guard vests, almost bright colored vests, and all of them have their languages written on them. And so people are looking for refugees getting off the trains, and it says what languages they speak. So they can help to translate and help to guide them. There are services right outside of the train station. There has been funds set aside by the government and housing set aside by the government, so that people can come and feel like they don't have to fight yet another battle now that you're in a place that's secure, then finding a way to be secure in the secure. And so I've been really, really impressed by that, because that's not what I'm used to seeing in the States. I see a lot of people saying, no, don't come here. So Right. That's kind of what it's like right now. Okay. And I stay up personally with the news, but I also follow correspondents who are either on the ground or in touch specifically with the situation.
Yeah,
you kind of have to do your own work. Even, in the United States, you kind of have to do your own work, because the news syndicates are going to choose for you. And as you said, it'll get quiet eventually, because it's no longer flashy.
Yeah, until some atrocity happens. And then it's can we be any more shocked? Because what happens here is, honestly, I think we're just numb to death and what's happening when you have 12 children killed in Texas. And, people are just numb to what's going on. And all you have to turn to is kind of entertainment and the extreme of how entertainment has gone. If you're a fan of Stranger Things, the latest series is more extreme and gory than all the prior episodes. So it just goes to show that we're sort of being desensitized, but that's a whole philosophical conversation we're not going to get into. But
yes, that's a paradigm I have not studied myself.
Yeah, we're just very numb to it. All right. So why don't we just close out, and why don't you share with everyone a little bit more about how they can get in touch with you, what you'd like to maybe have as just some leave behinds and takeaways for folks.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually would invite you to watch my latest Creative Mornings talk, which I'm sure that Brian will link to. But if you search my name, Creative Mornings, you'll find it. Otherwise, you can find me at veronicakirin.com. So that's a great place to start. And that's where all the social media links are. My book and books, actually, because I've been included in several anthologies for fiction writing too, are on Amazon. So if you search my name on Amazon, you can follow me as an author. And I, appreciate, of course, if you do feel like buying my book. Or you can go to the website, storiesofelders.com, and you can buy a signed copy if you are in the United States. So lots of options for engagement. And I think, Brian, you mentioned that, there's a documentary of Stories of Elders because I took footage of the interviews. That's
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah. So that was a finalist at the Liftoff Film Festival. That's at storiesofelders.com too. So you can go watch that film in addition to buying a
Add
signed copy of the
filmmaker
book.
to your repertoire. You have quite a detail.
No, I worked with an incredible filmmaker in order to put that footage together. I can't claim that.
That's awesome. Yes. And I, after, of course, I did my interviews way back in 2008, but I think had I to do it over again, I would try to have captured them all on video. And the medium is just different. And it would be probably more of a podcast, which today, that's sort of what we're doing is we're publishing in real time. Just a different form of content. And I think you offer some great insights and it's that authenticity, I think, is where some of the real magic and gems come through. I'm sure in your interviews, it's the unscripted stuff that you have to get to that little diamond in the rough because we're so conditioned and trained, especially when we're on camera or being recorded, to suppress our truth.
Right. Be poised, be eloquent. And they're in both of my studies, there were often people crying because we would get to a point of openness and sharing. And it feels for again, talking about books, for anyone who has wondered what it's like to be doing this type of work, it feels a little bit like being the giver, where I have all of these histories and stories in my head that aren't my own. They're not my lived experiences, but I've gone so deep with the people, over 100 years back in some cases, that there's this extra depth to my perception of what the world is and what the world is like.
And I imagine the families and the survivors, because you mentioned about 25% of the folks you interviewed have passed, are very appreciative of you capturing this slice. Because I will share that one thing that was very insightful to me is, so one of the follow-on books was done by another author, Don McGrath, 50 Athletes Over 50. He interviewed my dad. And listening to his interview with my dad shared things I'd never known about from my father, because he just assumes we know these things and we see them a certain perspective. When someone they don't know interviews them and asks them questions, I was like kind of blown away at the interview.
Right. Yep, exactly. And all of the interviews with consent have been turned into podcasts. So if you want to hear from the people in their own words, there's clips of those interviews on the website as well. There's tons of ways to engage.
Wow.
So yeah, it's really an amazing experience.
All right. So what do you have planned for the rest of the year? Here we are in June. What do you hope to achieve before the year's over?
That's a great question, because I always take a week off at the end of June in order to plan the rest of the year. So there may be, more books in the works. Not really at liberty to say quite yet, but that plan will galvanize further.
Are you coming back to the U.S. or not?
In what time context?
In the next 12 months.
My brother is getting married and I'm officiating the wedding. So I will definitely be back in September.
Just for a visit. Okay. Well,
just for a visit.
Enjoy your time in Berlin, and you've got some options. So really appreciate your time, Veronica, taking time out of your busy schedule because you're doing so much.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been really a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Tech Reads, sponsored by Softec. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe and share it with your colleagues. If you have comments, questions, or want to suggest an author for a future episode, visit Softec at softec.org and click on the Tech Reads link.